I never imagined my marriage would unravel like this. David, the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, stood before me in the kitchen one evening, his voice cold and detached. "I've decided to move in with Kim and Nicole," he said. "You should start looking for a cheap place. You don't belong here anymore." His words hit me like a brick. I stood there, stunned, wondering if I had misheard him. The house we lived in, this house that held so many memories, was registered under my name. Did David really think he could kick me out so easily? I tried to keep my voice calm, even though my mind was racing. "I don't mind taking my name off the house," I replied, watching his face for a reaction. "But there's one thing I'd like to discuss before I leave." David raised an eyebrow, barely interested. "What's that?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I smiled softly. "Divorce." David's expression didn't change. He crossed his arms and leaned against the counter, smirking. "Divorce?" he repeated, his voice mocking. "Sure, my dad's dead, and you're no longer useful to me. Don't expect a single penny from me. You brought this up, so you're on your own." He stood there, as if expecting me to burst into tears, but I didn't. Instead, I lowered my gaze, covering my mouth with my hand to hide the laughter bubbling up inside me. He had no idea how clueless he was. As David turned to leave the room, I began to think about my next steps. It was clear that my marriage was over. I wasn't going to waste any more time trying to save something that was long gone. I'd been contemplating moving out for a while now, and the idea of starting fresh was more appealing than ever. A luxury high-rise apartment came to mind, one worth over $1 million. I had inherited it from my parents, but hadn't thought much about it until now. Perhaps it was time to move into that beautiful place, far away from the chaos of David and his family. David was 2 years older than me, and for a while I believed we had a good life together. He worked as a teacher at an all-girls private high school and was popular with the students. I had seen the love letters and chocolates he'd receive on Valentine's Day, though he always acted like it was an annoyance. "You don't smile like that in front of your students, do you?" I'd ask, trying to make light of it. "Of course not," he'd reply with a smirk. "It's a big problem if rumors start flying in a school like that." He seemed to care so much about appearances, always making sure to keep his professional life separate from his personal one. And for a long time, I trusted him. But over the past few months, things had changed. He came home later and later, often smelling of alcohol. "I was out with colleagues," he'd explain casually. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, he was careful to avoid any inappropriate relationships at work. But soon I started finding receipts from places that didn't seem like restaurants. One night, as I was tidying up, I found a business card tucked into the pocket of one of his suits. The name of the establishment sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a place for casual dinners. It was the kind of place men went when they were looking for something discreet. My hands shook as I held the card, realizing what David had been up to. He had been spending our money, what little he contributed, on someone else. My heart raced, not with sadness, but with anger. David only gave $1,000 a month to the household. That was all. He acted as if it were enough, reminding me constantly that we didn't have to pay rent because we were living in my parents' home. But what he didn't know was that I had been making the mortgage payments on the house we shared with his parents. The inheritance I received from my family was quietly keeping things afloat. David was blissfully unaware that he was relying on me far more than I ever relied on him. His parents, especially his mother, were kind to me. I treated them as if they were my own parents, especially since mine had passed away. David's father had been struggling with his health for years, his legs weakening to the point where he could barely walk. I had suggested we move to a more accessible home for him, and David's parents had hesitantly agreed. I offered to use my inheritance to cover the costs, and eventually we found a new place. But the condition was that the house would be put in my name, something we all kept secret from David. The new home was perfect for my father-in-law. We installed handrails, widened the doorways, and made sure he could move around comfortably. I had hoped the move would improve his health, but soon after, his condition worsened. The doctors discovered he had cancer, and by the time they found it, it had spread too far to be treated. In just a few months, he passed away, leaving a gaping hole in the family. After the funeral, I overheard a conversation that made my blood boil. David and his sister Kim were talking in the living room, unaware that I was listening. "So, does this mean you'll inherit the house now that Dad's gone?" Kim asked, her voice casual, as if they were discussing the weather. "I guess so," David replied. "Mom will probably live with us, but yeah, the house should be mine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. David was already planning to claim a house he didn't even own. The house was legally mine, and he had no idea. Kim's presence had always been a thorn in my side. From the moment we met, she made it clear she didn't think I was good enough for her brother. She'd make snide comments about my looks, my job, and my inability to have children, all while pretending to be the perfect daughter and sister. She loved comparing herself to me, constantly reminding everyone how hard she worked while I only had a part-time job. But what Kim didn't know was that I had been the one paying for everything. She believed I was just riding on David's coattails, when in reality it was the other way around. Now Kim and David were conspiring to take over the house, completely unaware that I held all the cards. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. It was time to make my move. A few weeks later, David's attitude took a sharp turn. "I'm moving in with Kim and Nicole," he announced one evening, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You should look for another place to live. This isn't your home anymore." I stared at him in disbelief. Did he really think he could kick me out of a house that was in my name? The absurdity of the situation almost made me laugh. I composed myself and looked at him calmly. "I don't mind leaving," I said, my voice steady. "But if I'm leaving, we'll need to discuss the divorce." David smirked, thinking he had the upper hand. "Fine, but don't expect anything from me. I won't be giving you a dime. You're on your own now." Little did he know, I had already been preparing for this moment. The house wasn't his to take, and I had no intention of letting him walk away without consequences. As I watched him walk out the door, I began to plan my next move. Over the next few days, I quietly contacted a lawyer to start the divorce proceedings. I also hired a private investigator to look into Kim's activities. I had a feeling she wasn't as perfect as she pretended to be, and I was right. The investigator found that Kim had been having an affair for months, sneaking around with a man from her office. Armed with this information, I knew I had the upper hand. David's smug attitude began to falter as the truth started to come out. He had been relying on me financially for years, and now that I was cutting him off, he was in trouble. The house was legally mine, and there was nothing he could do to change that. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, it became clear that David had no claim to the property. He tried to argue, but the facts were against him. His lawyer knew it, and so did he. Meanwhile, Kim's affair was exposed, and her marriage crumbled. Her husband filed for divorce, and she lost custody of Nicole. She had to move out of the family home, and with her reputation in ruins, she struggled to find a new job. It wasn't long before she came to me, begging for help. But I had no sympathy for her. After everything she had done, she didn't deserve my help. David, too, was sinking fast. He lost his job at the high school after a parent filed a complaint about his inappropriate behavior with students. The school conducted an investigation, and while they couldn't prove any wrongdoing, the rumors were enough to force him to resign. He was unemployed, without a home, and without a future, and I couldn't have been happier to see him go. I moved into my parents' high-rise apartment, finally free of the toxic environment I had been trapped in for so long. My mother-in-law came with me, and we built a new life together. Nicole visited often, and we enjoyed the peace and quiet of our new home. It was a fresh start, and I was grateful for it. One evening as I sat by the window, watching the sunset, the intercom buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw David and Kim standing outside the building, looking desperate. I sighed, knowing they were here to ask for something, probably money. I wasn't interested in hearing their excuses. But I decided to meet them at a nearby cafe to avoid causing a scene in the lobby. When I arrived at the cafe, they were already seated, their faces tight with frustration. David was the first to speak. "How can you afford to live in a place like this?" he demanded, his voice low and angry. I smiled politely and took a sip of my coffee before answering. "It's an inheritance from my parents," I explained. "I've had it for years, I just hadn't moved in until now." David's eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" he asked, his voice rising. "There was no reason to," I replied calmly. "You made it clear you didn't want anything to do with me, remember? You didn't care about property division, so I didn't see the need to mention it." David clenched his fists, and I could see the anger boiling beneath the surface. Kim, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "What about the mortgage on the old house?" she asked, her voice shaky. "We can't afford it." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. "That's not my problem," I said. "I've been paying the mortgage for years. Now it's your turn." David slammed his fist on the table, drawing the attention of the other customers. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "You're just going to leave us with nothing?" I shrugged. "You left me with nothing first," I said simply. "Now you'll have to deal with the consequences." As I stood up to leave, I felt a sense of closure. David and Kim had tried to ruin me, but in the end, they had only ruined themselves. I walked out of the cafe, knowing that my future was bright, and theirs was anything but. Back at my apartment, I sat down with my mother-in-law and Nicole, enjoying the peaceful evening. The nightmare was finally over, and I was ready to start the next chapter of my life, one that didn't include David or Kim, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free.